Hi, Crimies. If you've been here before, welcome back. If it's your first time, I'm your host, MAB, and you're listening to the Coffee and Crime podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for an all new episode again this week. I really appreciate your support. And I just want to start by saying that I know that none of the cases I cover are good because they usually involve somebody dying. However, some of my cases rob me of a couple hours of sleep, literally. And this one is so relatable. And I don't know if it's because I have a 12-year-old at home and I literally cannot imagine going through any parts of this story at all. So I guess that's just what I'm trying to say. It really hit me in the feels and it kind of hits a little different. But as usual, before we get started, please listen to the following disclaimer.
The content delivered through this podcast will at times be graphic in nature and describe criminal conduct which includes but is not limited to violence, sexual assault, and homicide. All suspects described in the podcast are considered innocent until they are found guilty in a court of law. I'm not an expert on any subjects covered, I'm just an interested party. The content will be troubling and upsetting to some people, therefore, viewer or listener discretion is advised.
So I decided to make this a two-part episode because even though each episode might not be super long, and I could be wrong because obviously I'm just recording, haven't done the editing or anything yet, but I think making it one long episode would have really just been too long, and splitting it in not necessarily half, but splitting it in two will just make it more digestible, for lack of a better word. So on that note, I would like to welcome you to episode 8, part 1, Karissa Boudreau. Bridgewater, Nova Scotia was a pretty safe and quiet place to live in Canada. And in 2008, it had approximately 7,944 residents. It became incorporated as a town in 1899, and it's located at the head of navigation of the Lahave River. Our story starts on January 27th, 2008. Residents of the town were getting ready for the snowstorm that was about to come, because over the next day or so, the ground would be covered by about 10 centimeters of snow, give or take. We all know what weather in the Maritimes can be. As people sometimes do when a storm or bad weather is expected, a few residents in the town had stopped at a Sobeys, probably just to stock up, grab a few necessities, their storm chips, and whatever else they might need to make it until the roads were clear the next day or the day after. Here it's the opposite, though. I feel like before a storm, there's no few people that go shopping. It's almost like the entire town just fills the stores, fill the parking lot. Like they're really panicking, like the Armageddon is happening. But anyway, it's fine. Every town's different, I guess. Penny Patricia Boudreau was born September 11th, 1974. And even though she was born in Ontario, she later grew up in Clark's Harbor, Nova Scotia. So just 3 months before our story began, Karissa had made the move back to Penny's and her boyfriend Vernon's apartment, but Penny and Carissa's relationship had been pretty rocky for some time. Karissa, whose name requires no introduction in the Maritimes, was born on October 4th of 1995. She was originally born in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, but she ended up in Bridgewater with Penny. At 12 years of age, Karissa was a pretty normal preteen. She enjoyed some quiet time in her room and spent some of that time playing on her Nintendo DS. She also listened to her favorite music by the Spice Girls, Miley Cyrus, and Hilary Duff. Karissa was also known for her genuine love of animals, and she aspired to become a veterinarian when she got older. So that's a pretty good aspiration, and she literally just loved all animals. Now, before Karissa decided to move back in with Penny, she had been living with her dad, Paul, in a small community named Shelburne in Nova Scotia, which is roughly an hour away from Bridgewater, give or take. Honestly, everything about living with Paul was great. They were really close and they got along really well. And Paul trusted her and gave her some freedom that maybe she didn't get at other places. What 12-year-old wouldn't like a little bit of freedom? I know my son does. But even though she was really happy at her dad's house, there was one catch. She did not get along with Paul's girlfriend all the time. So Carissa was getting older, her hair was cut shorter, and now she no longer had braces either, so she had straight teeth. And she just wanted to live somewhere that could offer her a little more action, or maybe just more things to do in the run of a weekend, or whatever the case may be. So Carissa made the move with Penny at the apartment on Jubilee Street in November of 2007. And as I mentioned earlier, another person who would be sharing the small space with them was Vernon McCumber, Penny's partner. After moving in with them, Carissa started attending a new school as a sixth grader called Bridgewater Elementary School. And because of her vibrant and loving nature, it wasn't long before she made friends there. Even though the move was really her choice in the end, and her father, Paul, fully supported that, she liked her new school and didn't seem to have any issues adjusting at all. She wasn't a huge fan of Vernon's. He says at some point that they got along great, so I'm not really sure if it was specifically an issue with Vernon or if it was more of the lack of space that caused friction, because three people in a small apartment, we all know you step on each other's toes. It's not pleasant. And I guess she was just finding it hard to adjust to three people living in a crammed, smaller space than what she was used to. Vernon was 45 years old, and his job was stocking shelves at a grocery store. This is actually where him and Penny met because she was a cashier at the same grocery store. They casually flirted, and eventually they ended up in a partnership. We're all familiar with people like Vernon, I think. 45 years old, no children of his own, because he did have Carissa, but no kids of his own, no real true ambition. And I'm not judging. Like, it's more than okay to be that way. Maybe not having children was a choice. Maybe they couldn't have any. Maybe it was just life that happened that way. We don't know. And maybe he was happy and content and comfortable stocking shelves. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. At least he was being a productive member of society. So if you ask me, that counts for something. And he kind of like just went to work, worked through his shift, and then he came home to relax and chill and have a beer. Now, as I mentioned previously, for the past little while, Penny and Carissa's relationship, I mean, they just weren't getting along at all. It was constant arguing, fighting, bickering back and forth, just no other way of putting it than they weren't getting along. And maybe it was teenage hormones, maybe it was something else. We don't know. Sometime in January, Vernon had enough of the bickering because at this point it had been a few months and it was starting to take its toll. And I get it. You go to work, you work 8 hours, 10 hours, any amount of time that you're away from home. Your home should be your safe haven where you can just come home, chill, relax in the quiet or as quiet as possible if you don't have kids, of your own space. So for Vernon to work and then come home to his partner and her child fighting, and this was a daily occurrence, I can imagine it got old quick. So he had a conversation with Penny and basically told her that her and Carissa should work on their relationship because the fighting was just getting to be too much. And this weighed heavy on Penny's mind, and she realized that he was probably not wrong and that her and Carissa could no doubt benefit from a real, genuine heart to heart. I mean, they did sort of get along before, so why couldn't they get along again? Because by now they were barely on speaking terms, and that's kind of an awkward living situation. And, talk about tension in a house when this is the case. So Penny goes up to Carissa and tells her to get dressed so they can go for a drive. And even though Carissa is reluctant at first because she really does not want to go for a drive with her mom, Penny does end up convincing her with a little more coaxing. So late afternoon, the pair gets into Penny's vehicle and they drive off for their heart to heart talk. Penny is driving with no real destination in mind. And when they make it to Lunenburg, she turns the car around and they decide to slowly start making their way back home. So during the drive, they have an argument when Penny brings up that Carissa's attitude has been crappy lately, and she suggests that maybe Carissa should see a counselor. And I'm pretty sure you know at 12 years old, that's not what you want to hear. You don't want to be told that you need to see a counselor. So Carissa did not want to, but I think in the end, she ended up agreeing, maybe just to shut Penny up, for lack of a better word, or maybe because she really thought it could be beneficial. Who knows? So by now, I'm sure the tension in the car was palpable, to say the least. They were already not getting along, and now they're stuck in a vehicle where neither one can walk away. And back to the heart to heart, Penny later explains that that's kind of partially why she wanted to go for a drive, because anytime she brought up serious subjects at home or wanted to approach Carissa to have a discussion, she would simply just walk away and slam the door. So Penny thought, if we're in the vehicle, I mean, she's not going to jump out, so she's going to have to listen to me. So it's the perfect place to have a conversation. So as the tension kept increasing in the car between the two, Penny decides to stop at Sobeys and grab a few things to hold them over until after the storm. So she had to stop now or not at all, because at this point they're close to closing time because Sobeys closes at 6. Penny asked Carissa if she wanted to come in, and Carissa was quick to answer no. Penny expected the answer to be no because Carissa often just stayed in the car when they went shopping. And I guess number one, she was only going in for a couple things, so it wouldn't be a long trip. And I guess number two, this might give them each a couple minutes to cool off before facing each other again. But then before Penny left Sobeys, she called home and left Vernon a voicemail message telling him that Carissa was gone. Sometime after that, Penny made the call to the police to tell them that her 12-year-old ran away after an argument they had, that Carissa was just gone. When Penny gives dispatch a description of her daughter, she gives a physical description, hair color, eye color, etc., etc. But then she also says that her daughter was only wearing a black hoodie, a black vest, blue jeans, and a pair of pink Crocs. If you don't live in the Maritimes or have never spent a winter here, let me tell you that Novembers are usually pretty chilly and they dip below 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And then if you live by the water, there's like this wind chill that's always there. It kind of never goes away. So it adds to the cold, I guess. It makes it even colder. So this girl is definitely not dressed appropriately for the elements or for the upcoming snowstorm. I mean, who walks in a snowstorm in Crocs, no jacket? Anyway, she's not dressed appropriately. But the only good thing is that this sort of gives Paul hope, because it it should mean that they would likely find her within a 1 kilometer radius, because obviously she wouldn't make it too far outside dressed the way she was. Right? Now, everyone goes to work and starts calling anybody they can think of to see if they've heard of Carissa, because it's only been a few hours since she ran away. Most people still have faith that she'll be coming back home shortly. But as the snow starts to come down, feelings of uneasiness and worry quickly start to settle in. Right around this time, Shane Boudreau, Carissa's stepfather, shows up after receiving a call from Penny, who told him about the current situation. He worked at a Michelin tire plant at the time, and he left work as soon as he heard so he could come and start searching for Carissa. Shane Boudreau came in the picture in a different kind of way. Paul and Penny had Carissa, and shortly after she was born, like a few months later, their relationship deteriorated, and Penny realized that she had eyes for Shane, Paul's brother. Definitely breaking the bro code. But Paul seems so genuinely nice. In the interview, he said he would only do one interview, which he did. And he just seems, honestly, just genuinely nice. It seems like a really good person. So, knowing his brother would take good care of Penny and Carissa, he was probably just okay with it. I mean, they were already separated and they were no longer together. So, it's not like cheating happened. And if it did, we don't know about it. And honestly, Paul wasn't wrong, because Shane and Carissa ended up being really close, and he treated her as one of his own, which is absolutely amazing. And from my research, I concluded that Shane had a really, really meaningful presence in Carissa's life. And Carissa really blamed Penny for hers and Shane's divorce. So if we rewind just a little bit, prior to moving back in with Penny, Karissa was a fifth grader at Hebville Academy, and she lived in a house, not an apartment, which meant she had a big bedroom to hang out in. And she also had a big yard where she could spend countless hours playing. Unfortunately, after years of marriage, Shane and Penny would end their relationship and separate. Now it's January 28th, 2008. The search resumes, and Paul even makes the drive up to help search for his daughter, which is not surprising. People were starting to wonder how far this little girl could have made it. It was freezing cold, the wind was blowing, and she didn't have a jacket, didn't have any boots, just a pair of Crocs. Something is starting to not sound right with the version of events provided by Penny about Chris's disappearance. Around this time, Paul also started feeling uneasy because he didn't find that Penny looked as concerned as she should. I'll play the devil's advocate here. We hear it all the time that everyone deals with everything differently in their own way. We all show emotion differently as well. That being said, I have a 12-year-old, and personally, if one of my children were missing, I would be losing my absolute mind. So police decide to step in and help, and they reach out to the media asking for help locating the missing girl. Now, after Penny is interviewed by the police, they obtain her permission to search the apartment and sift through Carissa's things in her room just in case they could find something that could generate a lead or find any information that could lead to finding her. And this is when detectives find some papers with Carissa's handwriting on them. The notes are dated December 2nd, 2008, but we know it had to be 2007, not 2008. Let me read them to you. I am sad because I have to go to school tomorrow. I miss Shane and Tracy. I have to go to bed at 9:30 instead of 11. I live in an apartment. There's no room for my stuff. I feel crowded. End of story. My life sucks until we live in a house. I know hindsight's 2020, and as an adult looking at this, I can't help but think, hang in there, it'll get better. But in the mind of a 12-year-old hormonal preteen, those were probably the biggest issues she was facing in her little world at the time. And I have no doubts that for her, at the time, these were serious irritants. Also, I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but if she felt that her room was small and she felt that there was no room for her stuff, maybe there was like a lack of feeling of belonging. Maybe she felt like there was no room for her there because her stuff didn't fit. I don't know. It's just something that crossed my mind. Clearly, Karissa felt a certain kind of way about being away from Shane and Tracy and living in a small apartment with Vernon and Penny. And I mean, justifiably so. After reading this, the police figured that, hey, you know what? Maybe Karissa running away is not that far-fetched, because now that we know how she really felt, truly felt deep inside, maybe she just really didn't want to be there. January 29th, Penny decides that maybe a televised public plea asking for help to bring Karissa home wouldn't be such a bad idea. I'll play that clip for you in a second, but notice how exhausted the woman on your screen looks. No, not me. When I play the clip, calm down. Her voice even sounds broken and tired. She's pale, she has huge bags under her eyes, big tears. Just take a look for yourself.
I don't know where you are, but just come home or call or something.
So the interesting thing about the Penny Boudreau video is that she shows a classic sign of emotional deception. She is attempting to appear distressed because her daughter is missing, but she's not showing an engagement of the distressed muscles, which are the corrugators, in between the eyes, which generally when somebody's distressed, they go together and up. The deceptive pleaders generally are unable to engage those muscles, and they end up looking more like a deer in the headlights. They look surprised.
I took her for a drive that day just to try to have a heart-to-heart with her in a place, like in a car she can't get away and slam her door, which she usually does to me.
In this frame and a couple of frames after it, Penny displays hostility both in her facial expression and in the words she uses and her tone of voice. indicating that she's still very upset, angry with Karissa for one reason or another. She doesn't want the world to know that she's feeling that, but it's coming out involuntarily.
Can I ask you what this has been like as a mother?
Penny responds to the question from the interviewer with a flash of anger and hostility. She knows that her daughter is dead. The interviewer is asking questions that are getting a little too close to home.
I fell for it, didn't you? This woman truly deserves an Oscar for this performance, honestly. Paul also joined Penny for this appearance with the sole intention and genuine hope that this might help bring Karissa back home. Suzanne, Paul's mom, was also there that day, and I believe that was to provide support for her son in such a challenging time. Penny goes on once again to provide a brief description of what happened the day her daughter disappeared. She said they went for a drive, they had a heart-to-heart, and they ended up having an argument. She said Karissa then just disappeared, and she looked directly at the camera while pleading for Carissa's return. This just made me puke in my mouth a little bit. When asked how hard this was as a mom, Penny answered, quote, "Not knowing where your kid is horrible," end quote. During the investigation, security cameras from surrounding stores in the area had been viewed, and they had also viewed cameras from the Sobeys where Penny had stopped to grab a few things. They end up finding footage of Penny in the Sobeys alone, which matched her version of events, and the timestamp on the video is exactly 5:40 p.m. Anyway, so by now, most people in the town are panicking because if Karissa didn't run away, then who took her? Was she kidnapped or snatched? Is she even still alive? Are the kids even safe anymore in the community? Missing posters were handed out to everyone, everywhere, every chance they had. Word needed to get out as fast as possible and reach as many people as possible so this little girl could come back home. Everyone wanted to bring her home. It was really a community effort. And again, in a tight-knit community, word gets around fast. People were panicking. And again, as time went on, it became increasingly difficult to keep believing that this little girl would just voluntarily keep hanging out in a snowstorm outside in the cold. Searches continued, and they were as meticulous and thorough as they could possibly be, with the snow covering the ground and with the LaHave River being frozen as well at this point. So for this search, the environmental and weather conditions were less than desirable, obviously. Just like earlier, Paul was starting to feel like something really wasn't right anymore. She was Daddy's little girl, and surely she wouldn't go this long without contacting him, right? He started feeling that Penny's version of events just really didn't make sense, and he couldn't quite put his finger on what exactly was bothering him. Again, it was about -18 that night, so technically she should have been found by now. So let's chat about the boyfriend for a minute. Vernon Ralph Frederick McCumber was born February 7th of 1963. He had been previously married, but the marriage didn't last long. He also had a few minor run-ins with the law, but I couldn't really find any information, so honestly, probably nothing even worth mentioning. Vernon had always been very adamant that he loved Penny and Karissa very much, and that he had no idea what Penny had done because he loved her and he just believed her. As the accusations went wild, Vernon admits that that's when he started drinking heavily, and he always felt in his gut that something wasn't quite right, but he didn't have any proof, so there was really nothing he could do. But please take a listen to this two-part interview in Vernon's own words.
When a judge sentenced child killer Penny Boudreau to life in prison, no chance of parole for 20 years, most people felt that now for the first time it would be possible for everyone, family, friends, the community of Bridgewater, to move on. And for the most part, that process is underway for the many, many people who loved and cared for Penny Boudreau's 12-year-old victim, her daughter Karissa. Except for Vernon McCumber. McCumber is the former boyfriend of Penny Boudreau, a man who has told us he's unable to put the past behind him without first addressing some key issues in the present. Mr. McCumber agreed to be interviewed in our CTV studios. Here is that interview. Tell me a little bit about your feelings around this whole issue of what people think of you. And by that I mean there is a public perception that you must have known or you must have played a part in Karissa's murder.
I know it was very hurtful. I mean, I was devastated myself. It broke my heart, especially to have a terrible thing like this happen. It just was hard on me. People thought I'd done something, and I had to live with that. Even with the work, I had to leave Bridgewater, and because people had their opinions about me. And I've had it affected me trying to get a job as well down here. Every time I applied for a place or something, they knew about what went on, and they had their own decision about that, right? So I had a hard time getting work as well. And it's just been I couldn't say anything. I couldn't talk to anybody, because I wasn't allowed to talk about it, and just to go through that alone was just a nightmare.
Do you understand, though, maybe why people might have had that perception, or why the community maybe had those feelings? I can see how it would affect them too, but I'm the type of person, I don't judge. I'd be careful how I judge. Because you can be so wrong about somebody, and that happens a lot. So talk a little bit more about what happened to you.
I mean, when this all happened, of course, anybody, I drank. That's the only way I could cope with it. I started drinking a lot. And that's what I did to survive. I'm going for, I had to get some help with that. And it's just, to have people think bad of you when you didn't do anything, going through the whole thing.
Except you were living with the mother of this child. Yeah,
and living with Penny, if she tells you that it didn't do nothing, you got to try to believe somebody, right? You got to at least be there for them, you just can't, walk away from them, especially her going through this, and I believed her.
Well, that's what I want to talk just a little bit more about, the day of, Karissa's murder. Yeah. Just walk me through some of that. What sort of day was that?
It was, well, they were going to have a talk, right? They were going to have a powwow. Talk to some questions about her attitude, right? So they were just going to talk and go out and have a sub or something like they normally did. They went out for a drive like mother and daughter, and, I stayed home because I had worked the night before. I worked a night shift and worked into the 12 in the afternoon, so I stayed home and had a beer and watched TV and went to bed, lay down through the afternoon when they left. And it was like another day. I asked them, would you like me to go with you? No, it was okay. And that's the way it was. It was just like a normal day. And till, she tried to call me to let me know that Karissa jumped out of the car. And
Is that what she said? Karissa jumped out of the car?
Yeah, that's what she said. She went into Sobeys, and when she came out, she was gone. And that's all, and I couldn't understand, myself. It was heartbreaking. It just seemed like another day to me. So then Penny came home. Then what? And then she came home and told me, Chris, like frantically, said, Chris jumped out of the car. And I said, well, kids, I said, she's just probably walking home. That's what I thought. She'd just walk home and, cool off. And then when we, around 7 o'clock, I made sure we got to call the police and report this, because, it was, 12 years old. I was worried about her. Do you remember the news conference? Because I remember your face at the news conference. You almost looked as though you were in disbelief or shock. I thought you had a very strange look on your face. It was. It was just, I just didn't know what to do. It was just such a horrible nightmare it was like a bad dream unfolding. And I just didn't know what to do, to be there for Penny and the rest of the family too, but you felt that the eyes were on you, and that's the way I felt, though, that they were looking at me like I've done something. But why did you tell her to make that choice? You said, it's either Karissa or me. No, actually, I didn't. Actually, I said, because they were fighting quite a bit. And I asked them, you have to do something about this. Is not a productive family when they're arguing and fighting. And I could come home and hear them screaming and hollering, right, as I was coming up the stairs. So I knew they and I was new in their family, so I thought, well, when we all sit down, we're going to see a counselor or something. That's what I wanted to, because to show a kid that, because she's going through a rough time where the divorce was, right? So, that's why I mentioned that. Something had to be done with their fighting, because it got so it was not constructive of the family, right? It was just all the time in the mornings, and you know, and I'd come home and hear them arguing, and so that's basically what it was about.
So when you were sitting beside her that day in the news conference,
I just want to tell you that you're
you really didn't know, you had no idea
No,
at
I
that
had
point.
no idea.
Please call
I had
us,
no
let me know
idea. I just
everything.
believed her. I really
We all love
was in
you.
love with Penny. You know, I fell in love with her, and Karissa too. I mean, she was a sweetheart. She always used to make me laugh.
Who, Karissa did?
Yes, she did. She always made me laugh. She'd hear my feet coming up the stairs. When I'd come in, she'd open the door, 11 o'clock, she'd go, boo. And I said, they took 2 years off my life, right? But she was, you know, just a kid, typical kid. You know, typical 12-year-old.
There's also stories about the two of you partying, doing drugs, drinking, you know.
Well, now I had a beer after work. I mean, I love to sit down after work and have a beer or two, but as far as the partying and stuff like that, that's not true. That's far from the truth. If we were drinking, it was to drink your sorrows. I mean, because you just couldn't deal with it.
For you?
For me.
So you were drinking quite heavily during that time?
Oh, absolutely. I drank really hard. And it's just to seem to, you know, because I was just trying to stay numb. Because it was so hard this whole situation. You really can't, unless you've been there. You go through it yourself, and then you realize, you know, the tragedy of it. You know, now her mother. That's a tragedy there. It's a nightmare.
Were you scared?
Oh, terrified. Absolutely. Nothing worse than having somebody think that you harmed a child, or the police, you know, blaming you for that. You know, I know they had to get to the truth, but that's the terrifying feeling, to be locked up for something you didn't do. You knew you were.
You really felt singled out more than Penny, didn't you?
I really did, yes. I took a lot of heat. It seemed to me I was getting, you know, I got most of the flack. You know, everybody was, oh, he had to do something, you know, or always like this, never maybe understanding my feelings, what I was going through. And I'm not just about myself here, but, you know, it's the truth, what I was going through, you know, and that's the way I felt.
You paid quite a price, as I understand it. You said even your family turned away from you.
Yeah, there was even family members and friends, you know, co-workers that even thought, you know what I mean? And I was alone, but I knew in my heart that God knows my heart and knew I'd done nothing. You know, he knew that. And it was, but I was the only one, it just seemed like. You know, it was only me and God that knew the truth, you know. And it says, I just can't explain that, you know, how that made me feel. And see, and not only that, I mean, I cared for the family, their father, and see them hurt, their broken hearts, and I know how much they love that child too. To see them go through this too was even hard for me to watch them, you know, and even knowing they may look at me a little different.
So how did it come undone then? How did her story unravel, and how did it end up to be where we are now?
I just felt, you know, I just felt something was not right though.
You felt something in your gut?
Yeah, in your stomach. You just felt deep down that there was something wrong. And, you know, it wasn't just right. And I think other people felt that too. You know, they could feel something. It just wasn't like a normal grieving person should be acting like, especially losing their daughter, right?
And at that point, what did you do?
I mean, I was having mixed feelings about it myself. You wanted to be there for somebody, but yet you didn't want to be around them, you know, because you know, feeling if they'd done something like that.
But did you call police?
Well, I've talked, like I cooperated with the police from the very beginning.
But did you tell the police, I have a feeling, you know, this is just my sense?
Well, I did tell them that. I did actually tell them that in the interview. I even went in and said, I feel something's just not right, you know, and I told them how I felt. I mean, I'm going to tell the truth, you know. And they said, you know, and I did. You know, told them whatever I could to help them. You know, it's always forward. Always tried to help them until they started looking at me and accusing me, and I can't cooperate then. I mean, I was scared to death for myself, you know.
And you offered to take a lie detector test?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I offered. They asked me if I'd take one, and I said sure. And I called them up a couple of days later because they were going to arrange it, and all of a sudden they changed their mind. They didn't want me to take a lie detector test.
So at what point did you know that she'd murdered Karissa? Like, when was that very clear?
I actually, it wasn't clear until I heard her confession. I mean, I thought, I knew in my heart there was some things that, you know, I didn't, you know, that made me question, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt.
How do you feel about talking today?
I'm glad to be able to finally be able to talk, and and have my say as well, just to tell them what I've been through, that it wasn't easy here. It was no picnic for anybody, and tell the family too how much I'm so sorry for them, see their pain that they went through.
Will you ever be able to see them and tell them yourself, do you think?
I hope so, yes. I hope so, that I can tell them that. Because I really do, from my heart. I feel for them. They've been all through this too,
Have you been to Karissa's memorial site?
I haven't. Well, I wasn't able to go because people thought that I had something involved with this, and I couldn't even go to the memorial, until this was settled. This is, like I said, I didn't want any confrontations with anybody, and people are entitled to their opinion, but may not be right. But
will you do that? Do you think you'll visit the site?
absolutely, yeah. That's going to be my first agenda. Actually, is to go and take one of her bears to the site that she gave me. So.
That was the bear?
Well, I gave her a bear called Teddy. I have she drew me like a crayon, thanking me for giving her the bear, because I said I had a bear, and I said it needs a home, right? And she thought it was great. She called it Paws.
How sometimes people say, things happen for a reason. Can you see any reason?
No. I know this was avoidable. It shouldn't have happened. If I had went that day, maybe I would have, I feel guilty sometimes, and if I had just insisted to go, she'd have been okay, right? But I had no idea. It'd be the last time I see her. I had no idea. I think of her all the time, though. There's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. I just remember the good things, and I remember she loved the Lord, though. She always used to have her Bible. She used to ask if she could go in and read mine. I used to have mine laid out on a table. She always loved to read the Bible. She'd be writing stuff down,
Does that give you any comfort at all?
It does, because I believe she's in the hands of the Lord. I believe she's with God, and it gives me comfort to know that she's safe with Him. That's the comfort I get a little bit. Even though through all this I know that she's in God's hands. That's what I believe.
As he said, he had offered to go with Penny that day, but Penny had turned him down, saying that she really wanted to spend that time alone with her daughter. I don't think things would have changed even if he had insisted. And if he did go with them, I feel like it could have still happened, just maybe at a different time. So police asked Penny if they can have some of Karissa's belongings, like things that could potentially contain her DNA, and Penny agreed. So at least so far, the family had been cooperative with the police. While all this is happening, there are still calls coming in from people reporting sightings of Karissa all over, because by now, this case has attracted national attention. And by day 3 of the disappearance, Child Find Nova Scotia also became involved in the case. So as kids go back to school, they can see helicopters flying around, which must have given kids and parents an uneasy feeling. A little hope mixed with the realization of how serious this case has become. Some parents would even debate whether or not to keep their kids home because no one knew if the kids were safe anymore. They didn't know if Karissa had been snatched or kidnapped, like I said earlier. So they don't know if there's, a crazy running amongst them in the community. So tension was running high, to put it mildly. The entire area gets searched again, but no evidence is found. Now, again, Penny's version of events indicated that on January 27th, her and Vernon had a fight or a disagreement, and she said that Vernon gave her an ultimatum, making her choose between him and Karissa. So, yes, side note, you know it. Any mom, in my opinion, should always choose her child or children over any partner, period. But also, If this was becoming such a point of contention if you're in your relationship with Vernon, why didn't Penny reach out to Paul so he could take Karissa back while they sorted things out at home? He would have been more than happy to have his daughter back, no questions asked. He just loved her so much he would have done anything for this little girl. So why did people feel like something just wasn't right? Why wasn't Penny out searching for her daughter? And why was she lacking emotion when people around her could barely keep it together? So, those are all questions I will answer next week in part 2 of the episode. We'll cover more of the investigation details, the confession, the sentencing, etc. And I guess this sums it up for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening and hanging out with me until the end. I really do appreciate it. And please make sure, like I always say, that you subscribe, join, follow, like, share, do all of the things. Remember, crime is a waste of time. And please join me next Sunday at 11 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time for part 2 of this episode. Bye, Crimies.